briefly introduce Tom. Reverend Doctor, I should call him, Tom Wilson, is director of the St. Philip's Centre in Leicester, which is an interfaith training centre. Tom actually started out life studying Japanese, which is another interesting story, so we can't detain you with today. But he's here today not to speak about Japanese, but to reflect on what we've heard in the context of his own situation and interfaith experience. So I will give the chair now to Tom.
I'm going to talk to you for about 10 minutes. So first of all, thank you very much, Shafi, for your presentation, and to Martin for the invitation to share with you today. I should say, when Martin asked me if I was willing to give a response, I said, I'm not a Quranic scholar. I'm not an expert in that. Are you sure that I'm the right person? And we agreed that the kind of response I'll give is from a practitioner, someone who has studied Islam in depth, though I obviously myself am a Christian, but talking particularly about my experience. And I will bring in a bit of the biblical resonances that came to me as I read through the book and listened to the presentation. I want to start by making an observation that I had to check what conciliation meant as I thought about what to do this. And that I would say this is a technical theological English word, which, there are lots of them, different faiths have different ones. So, if we were studying the Christian doctrine of Holy Communion, we might talk about transubstantiation. You're unlikely to use that word in any other context. I'm saying this because I want us to understand what we're talking about. So conciliation, Shafi defines it as in two ways. The informal restoration of good relations between two parties and perspectives, or the use of certain formal processes to resolve actual or potential legal disputes through an intermediary. And when I read those definitions, I thought, right, now I know why Martin's invited me, because that's my day job. I work, as was said, for the St. Philip's Centre, and we say we exist to help people learn how to live well together. We have 4 core values. The first of them is encounter, which is based on this idea of contact theory, that from 95% of the time, meeting somebody in person, having a proper discussion with them, helps you build a better relationship with them. 5, maybe a little bit less of the time, it goes horribly wrong, and then you have to sort it out. But that's part of my day job. That's why you need conciliation. We encourage people to understand each other. And were I running a training session today, I would always say understand doesn't mean agree. If we all agree on everything, life is A, boring, and B, we're not really saying what we think. Third, we encourage people to build relationships of trust. We spent a long time as an organization working out what this value would be. We talked about tolerance or respect, but decided they're very distant values. You can tolerate somebody at a distance without needing to get too close to them. I respect your position, but I don't really want to talk to you. Whereas trust implies I'm actually engaged with you, and we're working through our differences and working out how to do our 4th value, which is to cooperate together for the good of all. What I hope to do in the next 6 minutes or so that I've got is just bring out a couple of the points of contact I found between Christianity and conciliation, as we've heard it so eruditely explained to us, and then a few observations of how this works in practice. Thinking about the reference to Quran chapter 2, verse 177, and this idea of generosity, particularly maybe generosity to close relatives, I started thinking about the Johannine ethics. I did an M.Lit at Oxford, looking particularly at John's letters, so that may be why it came to me first of all. But I think John's ethics are very internally focused, and he's particularly interested in love for the community. So it'll be interesting, I guess, to explore this balance of how much time does a community of faith spend shoring itself up, looking after its own community, and how much time do we give to concern for others. There was a lot talked about in terms of relationship with the kin, and I'm going to quote Shafi's book. Relationship of human by kin is a fundamental principle of creation in the Quran, and that the importance of honouring ties of kinship is heightened by its conjunction with honouring the rights of God. That started me thinking about the question of family in the New Testament, and it's quite complicated, I think. You get a number of different things that you have to, I guess, hold in tension. In the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus commends reconciliation to one's brother or sister before offering one's gift on the altar. So go and be reconciled, go and conciliate. But then he says later on in Matthew chapter 12, his family are those who fulfill the commands of God, not his own mother and brothers who come to try and sort him out. And still further on in chapter 19, verse 29, he commends leaving family for the sake of the gospel. So you've got this very interesting juxtaposition. Then if we jump to John's gospel, Jesus is dying on the cross. What does he do? Amongst other things, make sure his mother is cared for. So he both in Matthew appears to reject and say, my family are those who do God's will. But then when he's actually about to die, he's very concerned for the well-being of his mother. We had a little bit of a reference in the discussion to creation and creation from Adam. And I was thinking about that again in the New Testament. You get Jesus using it primarily in terms of marriage and marriage relationships. And Paul uses it particularly to show the fall of humanity and then contrast that with the example of Christ. So those, I think, are some of the interesting points of juxtaposition and question. The whole thing about filial duty is also quite interesting. Jesus, as we say, presents some interesting examples. We don't know what Jesus thought of his father. He doesn't say anything very much about that. His human father, of Joseph, he doesn't appear. And we get a lot, obviously, about Jesus talking to God the Father. But Paul talks about honouring and care for parents, and he appears to appropriate the commands of the Decalogue, commands of the Hebrew Scriptures. There's a whole separate discussion about what Christianity does with that and how it works that maybe is for another day. But also, I think there's some interesting stuff about how far do we go, at what point do we accept, at what point do we reject, and the discussion of chapter 60 of the Qur'an made me think about Matthew chapter 16 and the binding and loosing authority, and what do you do with a brother you disagree with? At what point do you say, actually, you're no longer welcome in our fellowship? It appears, on a simplistic reading of those instructions, there's just a three-stage process, and then you kick somebody out. But probably in reality, it's a little bit more complicated than that. Overall, I don't know if that's my phone talking to my phone for you. Overall, I was thinking that I guess for a Christian, the pattern of dutiful conduct is primarily that of Christ. So you get Paul in Philippians 2 commending his example, the example of Christ, to what looks like a couple of people who are disagreeing with each other. So presumably, therefore, that's our model for conciliation as Christians. Those are a few biblical observations and then a few observations about practical reality. With the greatest respect to all of you who are watching us on Zoom, there's many reasons for doing that. Conciliation, I think, requires in-person contact. If you want to really build a relationship with somebody, don't do it to a little rectangle on a computer screen. You actually need to be in the same room as them. We've all learned to think, haven't we? Some things work very well on Zoom, other things not so well. It's a lot easier, I think, to hate in abstract than it is in reality. And I would notice that from my interfaith work. Relationships got quite difficult, maybe particularly when things were very complex in the Middle East, in Gaza, trying to get Muslims and Jews to talk to each other in Leicester. It's a lot easier when you can get them in the same room, maybe bribe them with a meal, and then build a proper relationship. When people are just exchanging or kind of firing their arrows at each other on Facebook, you don't get conciliation. So you really need to be in the room. You need to build this understanding. That's why we say understand, not agree. You need this understanding of another's perspective. You need to say, oh, that's why you see the world that way. That's why you do whatever it is you do. And that requires structure, planning, a process, and also a good improvisation when it goes wrong. I referred to contact theory. We plan, we try and do our best, but occasionally things don't happen as we want them to. And then we have to work out how to do the second thing, which is de-escalation. You have to take things back down a notch and slowly lower the temperature. It's only, I guess, when one person in this discussion chooses to not take revenge, to not get their own back, that we can start the process of conciliation. And I think you can model this and then other people will copy it. Richard was talking about earlier today, he's been helping some trainee vicars build their interfaith relational skills. My experience of doing that is if you've built a strong relationship with somebody, others can enter into that. So if you can demonstrate how you're conciliating, if you can demonstrate how you're building a friendship, others find it much easier to do so. This, of course, all takes, my third point, time and resources. Time builds the relationship, resource shows this is important. We put energy and money into things we value. You do also, though, I think, have to know when to walk away. You have to know when you're going to decide this isn't working, I'm not going to try this anymore. In our experience, particularly working with school groups, the younger the better. Often by the time they've reached secondary, it's already too late to build really good relationships. Although I would say it is definitely possible and that we can learn how to share spaces with those with whom we disagree.